Hey, future doctors. Ready to dive into some anatomy?
Always ready.
It can be a little overwhelming sometimes, right?
Yeah, it really is. It's like trying to map out an entire universe, except this universe is, well, inside a human.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But that's what makes it so fascinating, too, in this deep dive. Well, we're going to try to connect those tiny details to the bigger picture. How does the body actually work? You know?
Yeah, it's amazing how all those pieces fit together.
Speaking of pieces, let's talk organ systems.
Uh-huh.
We've all been hitting the books hard, learning about cells and tissues and all that. But why are these organ systems so important?
It's like this, imagine trying to understand a city by only looking at individual houses. You wouldn't get a sense of how the whole thing functions, right?
Right.
Organ systems. They're like those interconnected networks in a city, each with its own role, but all working together to keep everything running smoothly. The human city, alive and kicking.
Okay, so that makes sense. Like we've got the cardiovascular system delivering oxygen and nutrients, and then the respiratory system is all about gas exchange, and the nervous system, well, that's like the control center.
Exactly. And don't forget those unsung heroes. The lymphatic system cleaning up waste, the endocrine system, all about those
And
hormones.
Nones, gotta love them.
And, of course, the integumentary system, the skin. More than just a pretty face, though, it's our shield against the outside world, our first line of defense.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you really think about it. All these systems just humming along 24/7, keeping us going.
It's pretty incredible.
So for this deep dive, we're focusing on three systems that are, well, they're pretty crucial for understanding how the body moves and responds to the world around it. The skeletal system, the nervous system, and the integumentary system.
Yeah,
Sound good?
sounds great. Let's start with the framework, the scaffolding, the skeletal system.
All right, so bones, 206 of them to be exact. Well, hopefully 206 med school could be pretty stressful, you know.
Mhm.
But what I find fascinating is how each bone is like this perfectly designed puzzle piece for its specific job.
Exactly, like the skull. It's not just a hard shell, it's protecting the brain, housing those sensory organs, and even providing attachment points for muscles. And the ribs, protecting the heart and lungs.
It's like a suit of armor.
Yeah.
What about the long bones in our limbs? Those seem pretty straightforward, but I bet there's more to them than meets the eye.
Oh, absolutely. The femur, for example, longest bone in the body. It's got curves and angles that distribute weight, absorb shock, and let us move in all sorts of ways. And if you look closely, you'll see bumps and ridges and grooves. All those provide attachment points for muscles and ligaments.
So it's not just about the bones themselves, it's about how they connect and interact with everything around them.
It's all connected.
Speaking of connections, joints. They're what make movement possible, right?
Joints are where the action is. Hinge joints in our elbows and knees, ball and socket joints in our shoulders and hips. We've even got gliding joints in our wrists and ankles. All these different types of joints allow for different ranges of motion, and they're supported by ligaments, tendons, and cartilage.
So understanding the skeletal system is about more than just memorizing bone names. It's about seeing how those bones fit together, how they interact with muscles to create movement, and how they can handle all the stresses and strains of everyday life.
Exactly. And to truly appreciate the complexity of the skeletal system, you need to study it topographically.
Topographically, what does that even mean?
By region, you need to see how the bones in each area relate to each other and to the surrounding
Oh,
structures.
I see.
Let's take the shoulder joint, for example. It's not just a simple connection between the humerus and the scapula. It's a complex interplay of bones, muscles, ligaments, and tendons that allow for this incredible range of motion.
It's like a 3D puzzle.
Exactly. And that's why understanding the skeletal system is crucial for any aspiring doctor. Whether you're diagnosing a fracture, treating a sports injury, or even performing surgery, you need a deep understanding of how it all works together. Those bones, those joints, those surrounding tissues, it's all connected.
Okay, so we've covered the skeletal system. It's amazing how something as seemingly simple as our bones can be so complex.
The human body is full of surprises.
It really is. Now, let's shift gears and dive into the control center of the body, the nervous system. This is where things get really interesting because we're talking about the electrical impulses that control our every thought, movement, and sensation.
And it's all based on a network of billions of these specialized cells called neurons. They're communicating with each other through electrical and chemical signals.
It's like a super fast internet connection, constantly sending messages throughout the body. But how does it actually work? How does my brain tell my toe to wiggle?
Okay, so it's like a chain reaction. It starts with a signal in the brain's motor cortex. Then it travels down the spinal cord, hops onto a peripheral nerve and zings down to the muscles in your toe, causing them to contract.
All in a fraction of a second.
Exactly.
That's amazing.
Uh,
But I gotta admit, it's kind of hard to wrap my head around how complex it all is. Billions of neurons firing in perfect sync to coordinate our movements, our thoughts, our feelings. Mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling, and we're only just beginning to understand it all, really.
Yeah.
But to make it a little easier to digest, let's break it down into a few key parts.
Okay, that sounds good.
So we can divide the nervous system into two main branches, the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. Somatic is all about voluntary actions like moving those muscles. And autonomic, well, that handles the involuntary stuff, regulating your heartbeat, breathing, digestion, all those things you don't have to think about.
So somatic is like conscious control and autonomic is like behind the scenes.
Got it. Exactly. And within the autonomic nervous system, we have two more subdivisions. The sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. Sympathetic, that's your fight or flight system, revs things up when you're stressed. And parasympathetic calms things down, promotes rest and digestion.
Ah, the sympathetic nervous system. That explains why my heart races before a big exam. It's like my body's preparing for battle, even though the only weapons involved are pens and highlighters.
That's a great way to put it. Your body's responding to that perceived stress, even if it's not a life or death situation.
So we've got this web of nerves carrying messages all over the body. But how do we actually make sense of those messages? How does the brain process sensory information and turn it into something meaningful? That's where our senses come in, right?
Exactly. Our senses sight, hearing, touch, taste, and smell. They're all connected to the nervous system. We have these specialized sensory receptors that detect stimuli from the environment and convert those into electrical signals which travel to the brain.
So when I smell those freshly baked cookies, it's because the aroma triggers those receptors in my nose, which then sends signals to my brain, which interprets those signals as the smell of cookies.
That's the basic idea. And it's not just about recognizing the smell either. Your brain connects that smell to memories and emotions and even physiological responses.
So much is happening just to process a simple smell.
The brain is a powerful thing, and we haven't even gotten to things like learning, memory, or consciousness.
Okay, we'll save those mysteries for another deep dive. For now, let's move on to the integumentary system.
Sounds good.
I know when people think integumentary system, they just think skin. But there's more to it, right?
Oh, absolutely. The skin is actually our largest organ.
Really?
Yeah, and it's our interface with the outside world, protecting us from injury, infection, even those harmful UV rays.
Like a suit of armor. But it's not just a passive barrier, right? It's responding to the environment.
Exactly. It's sensing changes in temperature, pressure, and even pain. It has sweat glands to regulate body temperature, and it even produces vitamin D.
Wait, the skin produces vitamin D? I thought we only got that from food or supplements.
Well, those are important too, but sunlight hitting the skin triggers this chemical reaction that actually converts a precursor molecule into vitamin D.
Wow, I learn something new every day.
And the skin's not just one single layer. We've got the epidermis, the outermost layer, the dermis in the middle, and then the hypodermis, the innermost layer.
Those are many layers.
And each layer has its own special function.
What about things that grow out of our skin, like hair and nails? Are those part of the integumentary system too?
They are. Hair helps to insulate us and protect our skin from the sun, and nails provide support and protection for our fingertips and toes.
It's incredible how much we take our skin for granted. It's always working hard to protect us, regulate our temperature, and even produce vitamins.
It really is an amazing organ.
So we've covered a lot of ground, from the skeletal system that gives us our framework, to the nervous system orchestrating everything, to the integumentary system acting as our protective barrier. We've seen how these systems aren't just isolated units, but interconnected networks working together to keep us functioning.
And in the next part of our deep dive, we'll delve even deeper into the other organ systems, exploring their unique functions and how they all contribute to the amazing symphony of life that is the human body.
So stay tuned. Welcome back to our anatomical adventure. We explored some pretty amazing systems in the last part, but there's so much more to uncover, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely.
What's next on our journey through the human body?
Well, let's dive into a system that's, well, it's crucial for keeping things clean and balanced inside. The lymphatic
The
system.
lymphatic system, I know it involves lymph nodes, and those can get swollen when we're sick, but I'm a little fuzzy on the details, to be honest. What exactly is lymph?
So lymph, it's this clear fluid that comes from the fluid surrounding our cells. You can kind of think of it like the leftovers from the circulatory system, extra fluid, proteins, all that stuff that needs to be filtered and sent back to the bloodstream.
So it's like a drainage system for our tissues.
Right.
Okay, but how does that tie into immunity?
Well, it's like a surveillance network for the body.
Hmm.
As the lymph travels through the lymphatic vessels, it has to pass through these checkpoints, the lymph nodes. And inside those nodes, we've got immune cells, lymphocytes, always on the lookout for anything suspicious, bacteria, viruses, you name it.
So if they spot an intruder, they sound the alarm and boom, immune response.
Exactly. And here's a fun fact. The lymphatic system, it's actually connected to the digestive system too. We have these specialized lymphatic vessels in the small intestine called lacteals. And guess what they do?
Right.
They absorb fats from the food we eat and transport those fats into the bloodstream.
No way. So the lymphatic system, it's like a multitasking marvel. Immunity, fluid balance, and even fat absorption.
It really is.
Yeah.
And speaking of systems that keep things balanced, let's shift gears to the endocrine system, the body's master regulator.
Hormones, hormones, hormones. It can be a little overwhelming trying to keep them all straight, though.
Yeah, it's a complex system, but we can break it down. Basically, it's a network of glands that produce and secrete hormones. And these hormones, they act like little messengers, traveling through the bloodstream to different cells and organs, delivering instructions and regulating all sorts of things.
Everything from our metabolism to our mood.
Right, it's like an internal communication system, making sure all the different parts of the body are working together smoothly.
So what are some of the key players in this endocrine orchestra?
Well, we've got the pituitary gland, sometimes called the master gland because it controls so many other endocrine glands. It's hanging out at the base of the brain, and it pumps out hormones that regulate growth, metabolism, reproduction, you name it.
The conductor of the orchestra.
Exactly. And then we have the thyroid gland in your neck. Produces hormones that regulate your metabolism, basically how fast your body burns energy.
Oh, the thyroid. I've heard that one can be a bit of a troublemaker.
It can be. Thyroid disorders are pretty common, and they can cause all sorts of symptoms, from weight changes to fatigue to mood swings.
So getting those thyroid hormones balanced is crucial. What about the pancreas?
The pancreas, it's a two-for-one deal. It's got both exocrine and endocrine functions. It produces digestive enzymes to break down food, but it also has these clusters of cells called islets of Langerhans. And those produce hormones like insulin and glucagon, which are key for regulating blood sugar.
Insulin. That's the hormone that helps our cells use glucose from the blood. And if it's not working properly, that's when people develop diabetes.
Exactly. Diabetes happens when the pancreas doesn't produce enough insulin or when the body's cells become resistant to insulin's effects. That leads to high blood sugar, which can cause all sorts of problems.
So we've got the pituitary, the thyroid, and the pancreas. What other endocrine glands are there?
Well, there are the adrenal glands. They sit on top of the kidneys and produce hormones like adrenaline, cortisol, and aldosterone. They're involved in the stress response, fluid balance, and blood pressure regulation.
Adrenaline. That's the one that gives us that burst of energy when we're facing a challenge, right? Those late-night study sessions fueled by caffeine and adrenaline.
Adrenaline, also known as epinephrine, it's all part of the fight-or-flight response. It gets your heart racing, blood pressure up, blood flowing to those muscles. You're ready for action.
Okay, so adrenaline is for short-term stress. What about cortisol? I've heard that one's not so great if it's high for too long.
Cortisol gets a bad rap as the stress hormone, but it does a lot more than that. It regulates blood sugar, metabolism, and inflammation. But yeah, chronic stress can lead to high cortisol levels, and that can have negative effects on your health. Immune system problems, weight gain, even heart issues.
Sounds like the endocrine system is all about balance.
It really is.
So we've talked about the lymphatic system, the cleanup crew and immune surveillance, and the endocrine system with all its hormones, keeping everything in check. That's amazing how these systems work together.
And speaking of working together, let's move on to a system that's all about energy and building blocks. The digestive system, taking the food we eat and breaking it down into nutrients our cells can actually use.
Okay, let's follow the journey of a cheeseburger. From the moment it enters our mouth to, well, the end of the line, I've always wondered what actually happens to food once we swallow it.
It goes on quite the adventure, through a long muscular tube that runs from your mouth all the way to your anus. We call it the gastrointestinal tract, or GI tract for short.
So it's not just one big stomach down there.
Nope, it's a whole tract. It starts with the mouth, where we chew our food, and mix it with saliva. Saliva has enzymes that start breaking down those carbs right away. Then, the food travels down the esophagus, a muscular tube that pushes the food toward the stomach.
Wait, so how does the food actually get from the mouth to the stomach?
It's a process called peristalsis. It's these coordinated muscle contractions that squeeze the food along the digestive tract.
So like toothpaste through a tube?
Sort of. Once the food gets to the stomach, it's churned up and mixed with gastric juices, which have hydrochloric acid and enzymes to break down proteins.
So the stomach is like a blender.
Pretty much. Then, that partially digested food, now called chyme, moves into the small intestine. That's where the real magic happens. Most of the nutrients get absorbed into the bloodstream there.
How does it absorb those nutrients?
The lining of the small intestine is amazing. It's folded into these finger-like projections called villi, which increase the surface area for absorption. And on those villi, even smaller projections called microvilli, super efficient absorption.
But the small intestine isn't working alone, right? I remember learning about other organs that help out.
You're right. It gets help from the liver and the pancreas. The liver produces bile, which helps break down fats, and the pancreas produces all sorts of enzymes that break down carbs, proteins, and fats.
So the liver and pancreas are like the backup singers for the small intestine.
Exactly. Then we have the large intestine, also called the colon. It's mostly about absorbing water and electrolytes from whatever's left of the food. And it's also home to a whole community of bacteria. The gut microbiome.
The gut microbiome. I've heard so much about that lately. What does it actually do?
It's this amazing ecosystem of trillions of bacteria living in our intestines. They help us break down certain types of fiber that we can't digest on our own, and they even produce some vitamins.
Wow, so we're basically roommates with these bacteria.
Yep, we live in symbiosis. They help us out. We give them a place to live. And research is showing that the gut microbiome is involved in way more than just digestion. The immune system, metabolism, even our mood and brain function.
Amazing. So, back to the cheeseburger. We followed it through the stomach, small intestine, large intestine. What's next?
Well, next is the final stage, elimination. All of those leftover waste products get compacted into feces and stored in the rectum until it's time for them to, well, exit the body.
So that's the end of the cheeseburger's journey. What an adventure.
It really is. The digestive system is incredibly efficient, each organ playing its part perfectly.
So we've covered the lymphatic system, the endocrine system, and now the digestive system. They all seem so different, but they're all working together to keep us balanced.
Absolutely. And speaking of balance, let's move on to a system that's all about filtering waste and keeping our fluids in check. The urinary system. Think of it like the body's water treatment plant.
Okay, I like that analogy. What are the main parts of this water treatment plant?
The stars of the show are the kidneys. Two bean-shaped organs that filter waste products, extra water, and salts from the blood. They produce urine, which travels down these tubes called ureters to the bladder, where it's stored until it's time to go.
So the kidneys are the filters, ureters are the pipes, and the bladder is the holding tank.
Got it. But what exactly are those waste products the kidneys are filtering? All sorts of metabolic waste products. Urea, creatinine, uric acid. They're produced as byproducts of cellular metabolism and need to be removed before they build up and cause trouble.
So it's not just about getting rid of extra water, it's about protecting ourselves from harmful stuff.
Exactly. And the kidneys do even more. They help regulate blood pressure, electrolyte balance, even red blood cell production.
Wow, the kidneys are like the ultimate multitaskers.
Yeah.
How does all that filtered fluid actually leave the body?
When the bladder's full, it sends signals to the brain, letting us know it's time to go. Then muscles in the bladder wall contract, squeezing urine out through the urethra.
So simple, yet so complex.
That's the urinary system for you.
We've explored some amazing systems today. The lymphatic system, the endocrine system, the digestive system, and the urinary system. Each one unique, yet all working together to keep us in balance.
And there's still more to come. In the final part of our deep dive, we'll explore the muscular, cardiovascular, and respiratory systems. How we move, how we breathe, how we thrive. It's going to be fascinating.
All right, welcome back to our final anatomical adventure. We've journeyed through systems that clean, balance, and fuel the body. Now I'm ready for some action.
Me too.
Let's talk about the systems that make us move, help us breathe, and, keep us going.
Okay, so how about we start with the system that gives us the power to move? The muscular system. It's a network of over 600 muscles working together to create every movement, from tiny facial expressions to those big athletic moves.
600 muscles. Wow. And I know we have different types of muscles, right?
Right. We've got the ones we control, like when we flex our biceps, and then the ones working behind the scenes.
Yeah, like our heart beating.
Exactly. So we can break them down into three main types: skeletal muscle, smooth muscle, and cardiac muscle.
Okay.
Skeletal muscles are the ones we have voluntary control over. They're attached to bones by tendons and let us move our limbs, our head, our torso.
So when I'm studying those anatomy diagrams and trying to remember all the muscle names, those are mostly skeletal muscles.
Yep, that's right. And here's something cool about skeletal muscles. They work in pairs. One contracts to create movement, while the other one relaxes. Think about bending your elbow.
Okay.
Your bicep muscle contracts to bring your forearm up, but at the same time, your triceps muscle is relaxed.
Oh, I see. It's like a tug of war.
Exactly. Each muscle pulling in a different direction to create that movement.
So what about those other types of muscle? Smooth muscle and cardiac muscle.
Smooth muscle, that's found in the walls of hollow organs, like
Yeah.
your stomach, intestines, and blood vessels. It's responsible for those involuntary movements, like the contractions that move food through your digestive system,
Okay.
or the way your blood vessels constrict or dilate to regulate your blood pressure.
So smooth muscle is working quietly in the background, keeping everything running smoothly.
Right. And then cardiac muscle, well, you probably guessed it, that's the muscle found only in the heart. It's what keeps your heart beating nonstop your entire life, pumping blood throughout your body.
The heart is amazing.
It really is. And that brings us to the system that keeps the heart supplied with oxygen and nutrients, the cardiovascular system. It's a closed loop of blood vessels carrying blood to every single cell in the body.
I've always been fascinated by the circulatory system. It's like this intricate network of highways and roads with the heart as the central pump.
Exactly. The heart is a four-chambered organ that pumps that oxygen-rich blood to the body's tissues and then brings the deoxygenated blood back to the lungs to get reoxygenated.
So the heart is the pump, but what about the blood vessels themselves? Arteries, veins, capillaries.
Okay, so arteries are the thick-walled vessels carrying that oxygenated blood away from the heart, and they branch into smaller and smaller arterioles, which eventually lead to those tiny capillaries.
Capillaries.
Yep, those are the thin-walled vessels where the exchange of oxygen, nutrients, and waste happens. It all goes down between the blood and the body's tissues.
So the capillaries are like the delivery trucks,
Oh.
bringing those supplies to the cells and picking up the trash. What happens to the blood after it passes through the capillaries?
Well, then the capillaries merge into venules, which then become those larger veins. And the veins, they carry that deoxygenated blood back to the heart to start the cycle all over again.
It's like a perfectly choreographed dance.
It is, and without it, our cells wouldn't get the oxygen and nutrients they need.
We wouldn't be here.
Exactly. So we've talked about muscles for movement and the cardiovascular system for delivering those essential supplies, but we can't forget about the system that brings in the oxygen in the first place.
The respiratory system.
Yes, the lungs are the key players here, responsible for taking in that oxygen and getting rid of carbon dioxide.
Okay, but how does the air actually get from outside into our lungs?
All right, so you breathe in through your nose and mouth. The air travels down the trachea, which then splits into two bronchi, one going to each lung. And then those bronchi keep branching into smaller and smaller bronchioles until they finally reach these tiny air sacs called alveoli.
The alveoli.
Those are the sites of gas exchange. They're covered in capillaries, and it's right there that oxygen from the alveoli diffuses into the blood, and carbon dioxide from the blood diffuses into the alveoli to be exhaled.
It's amazing how something as simple as breathing is actually so complex.
It really is.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive. We've explored all the major organ systems, the skeletal, nervous, integumentary, lymphatic, endocrine, digestive, urinary, muscular, cardiovascular, and respiratory systems.
It's been quite a journey.
It's incredible to see how complex and interconnected the human body really is.
And this is really just scratching the surface. As you continue learning about anatomy, you'll keep uncovering more and more, and it's always fascinating.
So as you're studying, remember, you're not just memorizing a bunch of facts, you're gaining insights into the amazing symphony of life that's happening inside all of us.
It's pretty amazing.
Keep that sense of wonder alive, future doctors, and never stop exploring.